The UN says that nearly 69 million people are currently displaced on this World Refugee Day. Just more than 14,000 refugees have been admitted to the U.S. this year.
That leaves the U.S. poised to fall short of reaching its annual refugee cap by the end of the year. Here's what President Trump had to say earlier this week.
The United States will not be a migrant camp, and it will not be a refugee holding facility. Won't be. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's happening in other places. We can't allow that to happen to the United States, not on my watch.
All right, with more on this, we're joined by CBS News State Department reporter Kylie Atwood in Washington. Kylie, as you know, the Trump administration's refugee cap is at its lowest since the program's current incarnation back in 1980, and yet it still won't reach that ceiling by the end of the fiscal year. The president says he won't allow the United States to be a migrant camp. I don't know that it ever has.
Right. So we can't definitively say that by the end of this year, the U.S. is not going to reach its cap of 45,000 refugees. What we can say is that it's not on track to do that. The U.S. has admitted just over 14,000 refugees up until this point, and we're pretty close to the end of the fiscal year, which ends in September. It's about 2,000 refugees that have been admitted every month, so they're not on track to hit the cap. And this comes as the UN Refugee Agency says that it's facing one of the worst humanitarian years in history. 2017 was, and they predict 2018 to be even worse. There were 68.5 million displaced individuals across the world in 2017. That means that 44,000 people were displaced every day. And the U.S. has gone through a series of different kind of levels of letting in refugees. Right now, they're at one of their lowest in history.
You know, Kylie, a lot of the talk right now is about illegal immigration, right? And that's what the Trump administration has been sort of focused on. But the administration has also, over the past year or so, sort of embarked on reducing legal immigration as well, including the refugees. How did the numbers within the Trump administration compare to the Obama administration?
Right. So the Obama administration, when they left office, they had set the refugee cap at 110,000 refugees. That's more than double what the cap stands at right now. And the Trump administration came in. They quickly said that they were going to review the refugee vetting policies. And so they underwent two different reviews. Both of those finished up in January. And as a result, there were additional security measures that were implemented for all nationalities. There were certain reviews that happened specifically for individuals from 11 countries. A lot of people called that the Muslim ban. And also the Trump administration has required all refugees coming into this country to provide more about their social media platform and footprint to come into this country. And there's additional screening for individuals who are family members of refugees that have already settled in the U.S. So there are some changes that the Trump administration has made. But they're done now, and the State Department says that they have everything that they need to move forward and continue processing refugees. They're not pointing any specific reason for this slowdown in admittance numbers. So,
Syria, right now, the Syrian civil war is in its 7th year, as you know, Kylie, and thousands of its citizens are seeking asylum. The Pope tweeted this earlier today: "We encounter Jesus in those who are poor, rejected, or refugees. Do not let fear get in the way of welcoming our neighbor in need." Earlier in the show, we played and we showed tweets and various statements from religious leaders, from Jewish organizations, from Christian organizations. How is the United States responding to demand specifically in Syria?
Right. So up until May 31st of this year, only 46 Syrian refugees had been admitted to the U.S. That compares to about just over 6,000 Syrian refugees in 2017 and 12,000 in 2016. The U.S. is not on par with what it has admitted in the past few years. And that doesn't mean that the numbers of individuals coming out of Syria aren't increasing. They are. We know that some areas have have been cleared and are resettled for refugees to go back into their country. But the U.S. is definitely not one of the #1 admitters of Syrian refugees this year, even though they are the #1 country for admitting refugees on the whole across the world, just by the sheer numbers in considering how much the U.S. lets in versus other countries.
So let's talk briefly, Kylie, about the United States' decision yesterday to withdraw from the UN Human Rights Council. It is interesting that in the days that we are talking about these children being separated from their mothers, from their fathers, today is World Refugee Day, the United States is pulling out of this council. And they've stated their reasons, and a lot of people were expecting this, but I really kind of wonder, given the state of the world today, we just talked about Syria, we're talking about in Central America, in Honduras and Nicaragua, people who are really suffering. Does it seem as if the United States, because you are a State Department reporter, is abdicating its historical role in at least to stem the flow of refugees and migrants by helping these countries fix their problems and come up with some solutions so that their people don't have to leave?
Yeah, that's exactly what the critics are saying right now. You know, the U.S. is taking a step backwards in terms of being the leader on the world stage when it comes to humanitarian crises. And we saw that yesterday when the U.S. pulled out of the UN Human Rights Council. Now, they had some reasons for it. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley said that she tried for the last year to make changes to the body that is one that allows Cuba, China, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and other countries to be a part of that body, even though they themselves are human rights abusers. But she said that the U.S. maintaining its position on that body was giving it legitimacy that it shouldn't be giving it anymore. And Haley also complained time and time again over the past year that there was bias against Israel in the body. We saw that they passed a number of resolutions condemning Israel, more than they had passed condemning North Korea or Iran or Syria. And so that was what the U.S. pointed their finger at. Now the question is, how does the U.S. outside of the body institute changes? People will say they should have stayed in and tried to change it from within. The administration says they tried that, and now they've had to leave.
They're very valid points. I mean, it always has seemed strange to a lot of people to allow countries to be part of this council who have absolutely no human rights within their own national boundaries. And so the point that Secretary Pompeo made and Ambassador Haley is a valid one. There's no doubt about that. The question, of course, becomes now that we look at the role of the United States, the historical role that the U.S. has played in the post-World War II era. Are we abdicating that responsibility where we know that in some instances we've had to sort of bite the bullet at things that were perhaps uncomfortable for us to be the leader, to allow other countries not to fall by the wayside? And that's the question I think that this administration and the ones that follow are going to have to answer.
Yeah, it's a trade-off, right? DHS, which is actually in charge of the vetting for refugees coming into this country, most of their resource right now are focused on the asylum backlog. There are over 300,000 cases of asylum backlog. Those are individuals who have come to the U.S. and are claiming asylum, but they haven't been given asylum because there aren't enough resources to go through all of those cases. So they say that now they're focusing on that, but it's the same office that focuses on asylum cases that actually vets refugees. So there are fewer resources at DHS right now to be working on allowing refugees into the U.S.
And, you know, as the Trump administration further restricts the definition of what an asylum seeker is, we can expect even more people to ultimately be on that waiting list and then get rejected. We heard Jeff Sessions say just because you come from a high crime country like many of these Central Americans, that's not a legitimate reason to say that you should be able to seek asylum in this country. So we'll see what happens, right? I don't think those lines are going to get any shorter anytime soon. No. Kylie Atwood, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.